Live from the SABC's Auckland Park studios, welcome to this week's last edition of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko, and on the show this evening...
Speaker.
Hey, you, Pumani, no baby, Puman. This is your legacy, Puman. This is your legacy. You abuse
Pumani.
Even more dramatic scenes on day 2 of the president's budget vote debate.
There is a formalized process that I need to follow, and in time all that will be put forward.
But the head of state steadfast in his refusal to answer any question about the Palapala farm saga.
It has had its challenges, but challenges that as an institution been able to work around. But challenges really have been work-related.
Following Ramaphosa's suspension of Public Protector Busisiwe Mkhwebane, the president says the office is in good hands under her deputy, whom you just saw there. And following Ramaphosa's suspension of Public Protector Mkhwebane, President says that she will be ready and able to actually take over. We also bring you a conversation on poverty alleviation and how early childhood programs can lead to greater economic and social gains. All that and more coming up in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts now.
Speaker.
Hey, you, Pumani, no baby, Puman. This is your legacy, Puman. This is your legacy. You abuse
Pumani. And your legacy is disrespect when an lady.
Honorable member. Honorable Tafeni. Honorable
Speaker, what is this thing you are doing now?
Honorable Tafeni.
Lalela into esishoyo thina ukuthi sithini. Ngeke sizehlisa izandla kuleka nje.
Member. Honorable members. You take
Ayekele ngafuna ukusebenza ngoba nifuna khona ukuthi nenze ukuthanda. Ngeke nje
Kagama, stand up so that they don't touch you and walk out. Lima, wait. Thank you very much, Honorable Ntangwini. You may as well follow here. Remember, you shouldn't be here.
Another dramatic day for President Cyril Ramaphosa, from being held to ransom, as you just saw, by the EFF inside Parliament, to being grilled by journalists outside of the chamber. At a post-debate briefing outside the House, the country's media tried everything they possibly could to get simple answers from simple questions. The president, though, wouldn't budge. Here's how my colleague, Bulelani Philip, tried.
Basically, I mean, you've said and acknowledged that you received a lot of counsel from the political parties yesterday during the debate, and one would have probably hoped that you would have slept on that counsel. But there are just some basic questions that do not warrant for us to go into the merits of the criminal investigation. The one that needs to be answered is why would you store so much cash in foreign currency in your game farm? The second one is how much, because you've already indicated publicly in Limpopo that the amount that is being bandied about in the media is not accurate. In fact, what you allege to have been stolen there is far less. And the third question is, when was this criminal complaint, as you've acknowledged in your reply today, when was the criminal complaint laid and by who? The second counsel that you did receive yesterday was that, as you've said earlier, that you intend to go to the ANC's Integrity Commission to go and explain your side of the story. But equally, ordinary South Africans and South Africa at large are expecting you to take them into confidence around what is now seen or perceived as a suspicious incident. Why do you view the ANC much more important than South Africa in terms of taking them into confidence? And lastly, Mr. President, do you agree with the sentiments by some political parties that you should step aside pending the finalization of this criminal investigation? Because the argument is made that you cannot expect an official from SABC or from the Hawks to be investigating a sitting president. I thank you.
Coming to Bulelani, talking about the counsel that I received, and he asked a whole number of questions, knowing very well that those are questions that I said I'm going to be relying on the process that I have spoken about, that there's due process underway. And obviously Bulelani will always try to sneak in the question under a different title. But I have to say, all these questions are questions that obviously have to do with the process that I have spoken about. Now, you also say that why is the ANC Integrity Commission being put at a much higher level than the people of South Africa? I don't think one should necessarily see it that way. One should see it in a way where the ANC, which is the party that deployed me and the work that I do, has a formal structure, which in terms of the conference that has given me my marching orders in terms of the work I do, I have to go and explain myself to, and I don't think one should look at it as either or type of situation. The one is not much more important than the other. It is just that there is a formalized process that I need to follow, and in time all that will be put forward. Now you want to know if I will step aside because there could be a suspicion that I will interfere with the police, I'll interfere with various others. And we have said that we want the police to investigate whatever crime, whether whoever it is against, without any fear, without any favor, and on an impartial basis. And so if I were to say I'm stepping aside on that account, it basically means that I am confirming that I interfere in the investigative processes, which I must say I don't. And if I were to, it would be demeaning to those officials who work in those structures, because it would mean that they are not able to do their work on an independent basis, and it actually just destroys their own confidence because they will always forever be fearing that they may not follow things up properly because so and so is involved. Because we do need to free our various agencies and expect that they will act as fairly as possible. Just like what I said earlier about the public protector, it is the office that really matters. And the individuals who are in the office have to live up to the principles and the values that underpin the work of those structures. So that's what I would be relying on.
Due process, words us journalists definitely dread today. But can the president get away with what he got away with today if Parliament was to ask him the very same questions that Bulelani Philip and other colleagues asked? Well, let's get a view from legal analyst Ritumetsi Piri, who joins us on the line. Good evening, Ritumetsi. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. Good evening.
Well. The question here, I mean, is as we'll all recall, Parliament came under, attack. Well, not attack really, but was seriously criticized for not playing its role. There are now requests that Parliament look into this matter of the president, the whole farm saga. Can he get away with not answering questions the way he did with the media today, if Parliament was indeed to, call him to account?
Yeah, I think, firstly, we've just got to frame that, in the sense that Parliament is enjoined by the Constitution to actually hold the president and other members of his cabinet accountable, especially in the context of where we have what is potentially a breach of the Constitution or breach of the laws of the country and potentially the executive ethics code here. So, Parliament has an obligation to do that and must actually do so because that's what the Constitution places on Parliament to do. Obviously, you are alluding, insofar as questions is concerned, to one of the accountability mechanisms that are available to Parliament, which includes obviously answering questions in Parliament relating to this particular aspect, as well as potentially being summoned to any of applicable committees that may have a bearing on this particular matter. And obviously, if as a drastic measure, you've got the notice of motion of no confidence and potentially a removal. So, if that process had to be triggered by Parliament, the president would really have very limited room to wriggle out of not answering questions relating to this particular matter.
Mm-hmm. Of course, something that's relevant here is that the ANC, of which he is president, is in the majority by far, so they could just block that from happening. But I think it's important what you said right at the beginning, that if anything, actually Parliament has an obligation to play its oversight role over the executive.
Yeah, that's correct. And it is a constitutional obligation. So I think what will then happen, which we have seen in the past, is that if Parliament should shirk its responsibility in this particular aspect, you may see one or other interested party potentially, approach the Constitutional Court, for instance, to say that Parliament must meet this obligation. Obviously, there are questions about separation of powers that will play into that determination by the Constitutional Court. But certainly, if Parliament does not pick up the mantle here, I'm expecting that we would see one or two other parties then say to the Constitutional Court that at the very least, Parliament must engage its accountability mechanisms to at least get the president to say what has actually happened in this particular instance.
In fact, I'm glad you mentioned that, because during the Zuma presidency, Parliament did everything to stall things or make sure that the president was not brought to account. And in the end, it took opposition parties, it took NGOs and other community-based organizations to go to the courts and seek relief, and that's how Parliament was forced, in fact, to do many of the things that some people pat themselves in the back for today.
Yeah, I really hope we don't go down that path. I really hope that with the recent cases, as we're saying, the Zuma cases, Parliament has reached an age where it is brave enough to hold the executive to account. And certainly here, if any of these allegations are true, there are serious questions around the president's ability to comply with the law. There's questions around corruption laws being violated, questions around foreign exchange laws being violated. And that's a serious question insofar as the Constitution is concerned. And one would expect that Parliament, as an institution that is a representative of the people, would at the very least, seek to hold the president accountable through the various mechanisms that I spoke about earlier.
I know, litigation can be rough, it can be expensive, it can also take time, but it's been good, for South Africa on a number of fronts. I don't know if you would agree to that, because what it has done, certainly from where I sit as a journalist who's been, following these events, is that it has put certainty to a lot of things. In other words, where, party political interests, tend to trump, the law, it has given clarity in those instances. Would you agree?
I agree with you fully on that point. I think what we have seen is that the rule of law has been vindicated and upheld in similar matters in the past. But where it actually has sort of come at the expense of the law is that in matters like this, the very first casualty from a political perspective is that the courts are encroaching on political terrain, and they're going too far within the separation of powers. So it leads to a question mark around whether the courts are going too far, and sometimes to a question around whether the courts are actually doing the right thing. So in some ways, insofar as the rule of law is vindicated and strengthened, I think the courts as an institution, insofar as they continuously wade into these areas where Parliament and other bodies don't actually take their political responsibilities seriously, really just does then weaken the legitimacy of the court, or at least gives room for greater debate around whether the courts are going too far. So that worries me potentially in this particular instance. And that's why I would really, really hope that Parliament actually steps up to the plate here and not leave something like this up to the courts, as has been the case in the recent past.
But at the end of the day, the courts are, of course, the final arbiters, aren't they?
They are the final arbiters, but we do have a system that recognizes, a separation of powers, and Parliament must do its job so that the courts don't have to weigh in, or at least don't create a space where there's a debate around whether the courts are doing Parliament's job. So in this particular instance, I would sincerely hope that Parliament can hold the president to account.
In fact, Constitutional Court judges have said as much, that they dread the fact that they get dragged into matters that, in fact, the legislature, and other arms of, on the other arm, the executive, which is the other arm of the state, should matters that those two arms should be dealing with themselves. Thank you very much, Itumetsi, for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Okay, still coming up on the Watchdog, the soon-to-be public protector on challenges facing that office and her relationship with Busisiwe Mkhwebane. I'll also be in conversation with Oxfam and Stellenbosch University about a partnership they have forged to canvass for early childhood programs they argue will achieve greater economic and social gains for our country. Don't go away. Oxfam, a charity organization focusing on poverty alleviation, and Stellenbosch University have partnered to both study and create conversations around early childhood programs they argue will lead to greater economic and social gains. Pelisa Ngomo is the chairperson of Oxfam and the founder of Indaba Foundation at Stellenbosch University is Andre Shearer. Good evening to both of you, and thank you very much for your time.
Good evening, Boya.
Good evening,
Thanks for having
Boya.
us.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, perhaps, I mean, before we get to what you've partnered to do, may I start with you, Pelisa? Just give us a bit of, very briefly, a context on the state of poverty in our country.
Yes, I mean, thank you so much. One of the key things that we think this research is so important, particularly, is to build a foundation. I think Andrew, when he speaks, is going to give him much more detail, is to build a foundation where in the next 20 to 40 years, children have access to better, educational foundation program. But I think the key issue here is that South Africans, I mean, our Gini coefficient, for example, is at 68.8%, which is an indication of high inequality, social inequality in South Africa. We are still, for example, processing the unemployment data which was released by State SA, which indicates that 62.8% of young people are disengaged, lead unproductive lives, and in fact, it's possible that we're not able to trace them in terms of where they are, in terms of their own location. We have Black women who 40% of them are also unemployed. So, in essence, the type of partnership we've entered with, or we've been working with within the Aba Foundation and Andrew, is particularly saying that how do we set a new foundation, how do we set a new course going forward where younger people have a good access to foundational program fairly early. And I think, as I said, that Andrew will articulate in a much more detail on what's the impact of foundational program to children as individuals. But also one of the key things as well we want to bring into the conversation regarding this paper is to get public, policymakers to actually fully appreciate the need to invest in this sector, that it's not considered as by the wayside. And we think that there's a massive opportunity. For instance, now that the early childhood development has been shifted from social development, but also it's being moved to education. So in essence, it's going to be considered as part of the mainstream education. And currently, South Africa will spend about 6.2% of GDP in terms of education sector. But in fact, in terms of numbers, aggregated data, in terms of how many early childhood development centers were contributed, such data is not available. Even though perhaps, the positive side is that between 2002 and 2019, we've seen, an increased participation of children in early childhood development from 30.2% to 83.8%, and would still like to see the 100% participation. So in essence, there's a natural correlations between the state of the economy and access to education.
Andre, what have the two of you then done?
So actually, we've been working on this for about 6 years. The issue is education in the earliest years. If the foundations are not laid correctly, the balance of the education system is unsustainable. So we look at the entry point of our children into the school systems and the dropout rates between the entry into school and even the number of kids who don't make it to the ultimate point of grade 12. We got this data last year that 20% of the matriculants received 30% or more for mathematics. We know that the reading for meaning at grade 4 is not apparent. And recently, the Thrive by 5 index showed that more than 65% of our 4 and 5-year-olds are woefully not where they should be. So we cannot base a school system on an inadequate early foundation. So what we've been doing is researching and also building an education or a teacher training program that is a whole child approach, and it's a women's empowerment initiative in essence, and it's human-centric. So we live in a nation which is poverty-stricken, it's traumatic, it's traumatized. We know that there's incredible gender-based violence. Our fetal alcohol syndrome issue is the highest in the world. If we do not recognize that in the first 6 years of life, the child's brain plasticity is so vital If we do not allow the neural pathways to be laid in an environment where there is a caring adult that has some understanding of the child and who understands how to lead the child and allow independence and allow these neuronal pathways to take place, we end up with deficiencies that are actually never catch-upable. So Professor Jim Heckman, a Chicago-based, very renowned global economist, he's a winner of a Nobel Economics Prize. He's got 35-year longitudinal research that shows the single best investment in a nation's economy is in early childhood. The returns are extraordinary. Now, why? It's obvious. We see the employability of our nation is very poor. So the education system will never revive itself unless we actually spend the right amount of money. So if I may say, what we're going to advocate for, if you look at the budget for education and culture as being more than 400 billion, the early years budget is less than 5 billion. If you consider that the tertiary education system's salary scales more than 50 billion, and yet on this entire base of the pyramid, we spend only 10% of that on the entire system. The registration of ECD centers is incredibly onerous. Our view as a foundation is to say that we must reach every woman in this nation who is in fact caring for, looking after, or teaching children. We should not lay a parameter to say if you're not that, then you don't get this. We believe that reaching them with this particular form of education, we've called it a community-rooted education. It's linguistically flexible. It allows each of these women over a 6-month period sufficient information and acknowledgement and knowledge to realize how to coach a child to an entirely different outcome. We've just had a visit from USAID over the past few days to some of the centers in some of the most destitute areas here in the Western Cape, where the women have been trained and they were absolutely floored with the outcomes and the quality, and how children in this environment should, by the age of 5 or 6, be able to read and write in basic terms. And currently, the South African system has an appallingly poor rate of children entering school who simply can't read or write. And our children only learn to read or write in the mainstream system when they get to grade 1.
But of course, by highlighting the disparities in the budgets, you are by no means suggesting that this is only a money problem.
No, by no means. It is a financial problem partially. It's an allocation of resource. We're not saying the education system clearly requires an enormous amount of money, but if you allocate differently, your cost effectiveness for you in the later years, if you implement, I say to people casually, if we put 30 billion a year into early childhood, if we spent even 10 billion rand as a one-off charge and we reached 200,000 of the country's early childhood practitioners, workers, carers, we would immediately see an improvement in economic return. And over a decade, we would save money on the long-term educational outcome. Our educational outcomes would be better for cheaper if we lay the foundations early. And it is such a clear trajectory. I look at this every day of my life and I watch the outcomes. So it is not just about money, but clearly the budget needs to be allocated more to the early years to allow the later years to be less costly and burdensome. And remember, the other thing which is incalculable, we have a criminal justice system that is burdened. We have a traumatic circumstance in the nation. The country's children grow up in trauma. Our women grow up in trauma. If we allocate the resources early, children understand grace and courtesy earlier. They treat each other much more respectfully. They understand that an adult who's with them is loving them and it's a kind environment, and they actually learn more effectively. There's epigenetic research that shows a child in a properly crafted environment, whether in a shack or whether in a proper, high school or a well-to-do environment, the child grows up with a better genetic efficiency. So these things are so clear. We just need to actually open public debate and let families understand that the earliest years are absolutely vital. And nutrition, of course, plays a major role in that too.
Pelisa, I mean, we know that often politicians, talk the talk, but in many cases, they don't put their money where their mouths are. So in the years that you've been doing this, do you get a sense that you're being listened to, and politicians in particular are prepared to change their ways?
I think there's a positive signal, Vuyo. And I mean, look, there is a history that when you do advocacy work for resources to be shifted in one area into another from a prioritization perspective, is that sometimes you don't get your results immediately. But however, in this case specifically, I think the point I was making is that there are several open windows and the perfect timing in that is that the shift from social development to Department of Education is actually a positive signaling that in fact early childhood development or foundational program for children is actually going to be prioritized. I think that's the first issue. I do think that part of what we did through this paper, and that's why we call it a discussion paper, because we're not saying that we're sitting with all the wisdom that is required, but we do think that we'd really like to contribute in the public discourse into crafting that change to Department of Education, that fundamentally it must be supported by not only the issues around improvement in the curriculum, but also as well as allocation of resources, training of teachers, as well as the investment in infrastructure. And as well as fundamental, one of the key issues we've been raising in the paper, for instance, is the link between access to good quality education at a foundational level and the outcomes in terms of labor participation. And knowing very well in South Africa that we've had, a shrinking labor market. And amongst the key things is that the research we've undertaken has proven, including the empirical evidence of Professor Heckman that Andrew is referring to, is that shows that once children have access to good quality education, they don't only have a good self-esteem, but in fact they can become fairly industrious very early in their lives, and that they don't entirely have to depend on certain sectors to employ them, but in fact they could be future employers. So there are massive outcomes out of this, and I think that's a storyline, or that's a central message that we intend to take it up to the policymakers, that they need to really shift their thought process and allocate resources, but also prioritize this. So the point, for example, that Andrew is making about interacting with women who are even might be doing backyard care, for example, we'd really want them to be part of the conversation. And I think the nice thing about this is that it's a political conversation. All of us are concerned about children. I mean, in the same way we are concerned about young people who are actually unemployed, who are either drawn into social ills, but also who are not economically active. And we're saying that when all of us are frail and old, have stories to share, we would like to see a younger generation that is taking an appropriate decision, but also at the same time, an education system that creates, opportunities, but also choices. Because currently part of our education system does not allow a lot of choices for younger generation to choose from. They are often challenged into. So in essence, we see this, that there's a very clear intersection between investment in education, poverty reduction, inequality, and as well as fundamentally building a resilient economic development trajectory going forward.
Okay, let's hope that the important people are indeed listening, and let's get the conversation going, the economic and social benefits of investing in early childhood education in South Africa. Special thanks to our guest, Phyllis Angomo, the chairperson of Oxfam, and Andre Scherer, who is from Stellenbosch University. Now, following his President Ramaphosa's suspension of Public Protector Busisiwe Mkhwebane, the president says the office is in good hands under her deputy. Now, a couple of months ago, we did have the deputy public protector here on the show. What does she think of the challenges, facing that office, and how is her relationship with Busisiwe Mkhwebane? Those are some of the questions I asked her a couple of months ago, as I said, the last time she came on the program. We leave you with excerpts from that interview. Have a good night and a great weekend.
A journey of being a deputy public protector has been fulfilling. It has been humbling. It has had its challenges, but challenges that as an institution been able to work around. But challenges really have been work-related. The work that we face together as an institution, I've not had any personal challenges with the institution.
Let's talk about how fulfilling it has been. What have you been able to do? What opportunities have you had which perhaps you didn't have or didn't have much of before you joined the office?
I've been able to serve at a front line, even though the Office of the Public Protector is supposed to be an office which takes complaints at last resorts. But because of the governance challenges that the country faces itself, as the Office of the Public Protector, we find ourselves being at the front line. Now, if you recall what I said to you, that I would actually be internally looking at the institution and see how I can assist the Public Protector as is prescribed in the Public Protector Act. And indeed, I've been able to do that. I've been able to do that within the institution, but within the work of the institution. Within the institution, assisting to strengthen the capability of the institution itself, and externally ensuring that we're able to deliver on our developmental mandate as the Office of the Public Protector. As you are well aware, we've been running with a lot of impactful systemic investigations, such as the hospitals, which actually looked into the state of the healthcare system in our country, which we concluded during the COVID outbreak, and we've been able to start several other systemic investigations, such as the investigation that's looking into the higher education sector. But also, I've had an opportune time to act as a public protector for over 2.5 months, where I've been able to take decisions, as the acting public protector, and sign off on some reports, which included some of the procurement irregularities that happened during the pandemic in the Eastern Cape, some of the systemic matter into e-government in Gauteng, together with CETA, but also on the other executive members' Ethics Act matters. So I've really been able to have an all-round of the institution, which for me has been quite fulfilling, and I've been able to make quite a meaningful contribution.
Now, apart from those, or outside of those instances where you've had to act for good 2.5 months as a public protector, and having to perhaps lead during when you guys were focusing on certain projects like the Eastern Cape that you've just mentioned. Outside of that, how exactly does it work? Does Advocate Mkhwebane allocate you specific responsibilities, or do you work on everything together, jointly? How exactly do you work?
I've got delegated responsibilities from the Public Protector, and mine currently is the bulk of the institution, which is the AJSD, Administrative Justice and Service Delivery Matters, which is about almost 93% of the matters that we have in the institution, and the bulk of the issues which are affecting the people of South Africa. But I also have delegated to me customer services and stakeholder relations, which is very critical for the Office of the Public Protector, because we need to ensure that we establish a good rapport and good relations with our stakeholders, particularly the state institutions whom we investigate and whom we wish to see that there is a redress in governance reforms and other governance issues that we look into as an institution, but also overall administrative matters. I make recommendations to the Public Protector in respect of those. And the good governance and integrity matters, there are instances where the Public Protector asks for my contribution in the matters that she is doing, and that's of course the bulk of the matters that she is dealing with, but she does time in and time end involve me in those matters. But even if I do not recommend in those matters, I, however, sit in the full bench, which was re-established during my acting tenure, which is basically a think tank of the Public Protector, inclusive of executive managers and other leadership of the Public Protector, wherein we look into the matters that the Public Protector is going to release. But however, the final decision is that of the Public Protector, even in those matters which are delegated to me.
And then if that's the bulk of the work that you then take, it then leaves her with what? In other words, what then does she focus on?
The Public Protector focuses on the good governance and integrity matters, which I have said are not delegated to me. And she also focuses on oversight over the administration, but which I also have a contribution in because I make recommendations to her on those matters.
And when you said humbling, in other words, apart from fulfilling, it's also been a humbling experience over the past 2 years. What exactly did you mean?
Basically, is to have insight into the work that the investigators and the support staff in the Office of the Public Protector are doing, the magnitude, the complexity, but also their dedication into this work. Despite all the other media views about the Office of the Public Protector, the staff of the Public Protector remains committed to serving the people of South Africa to an extent that we work extensive hours into the night because we want to make sure that the people of South Africa receive the services that they're supposed to receive. Social justice is done, justice is done. But also the conditions, the socio-economic conditions that the people of South Africa continue to live under. We are also currently busy with a systemic investigation into the state of service delivery in the Eastern Cape that has given me quite insight on how far our country has come in respect of delivering services to the poorest of the poor people. The healthcare system investigation, which gives me sufficient and insight into the healthcare system beyond what I read on paper, and me having been privileged to have access to a private hospital, but having been there on the ground and realize what the people and the majority of the people of our country are still going through in our democracy, considering that the Office of the Public Protector is entrusted with strengthening democracy. So it's really been humbling for me to have a real life experience of people still getting water in dirty rivers, people still not having bridges to cross over. And those are the real life issues that the majority of the South Africans are going through.
Yeah, I listened to I was sitting through the briefing yesterday, talk about people, these are individual people who, 17 years down the line didn't have the houses that they were promised, and hopefully within 90 days or thereabouts they will get their houses and so on, courtesy of or thanks to the Public Protector's rulings. But you said something that you mentioned almost in passing, but I know it's not in passing, where you said despite what has been said, or the things that get said about the Office of the Public Protector. What are those things that have been said about the Public Protector which didn't sit well with you? Or which are simply not true from where you sit?
For me, Vuyo, is the issues of the incompetence of the office, even though some might want to attribute it to an individual, but the reality is that there is a team that is working on these particular cases. There is a team...
or which are simply not true from where you sit?
For me, Vuyo, is the issues of the incompetence of the office, even though some might want to attribute it to an individual, but the reality is that there is a team that is working on these particular cases. There is a team which is not as strengthened as it should be in line with what is required from them, by the Constitution, but who are making do of what they have. They are stretching themselves to fit the resource that is expected of them, and yet the kind of criticisms that they receive is not taking into consideration the circumstances under which they work.
And he also mentioned challenges. What have been the challenges of your journey over the past 2 years?
It's working under strained resources. The Office of the Public Protector is highly under-resourced. It is not just an ordinary office of an ombud that you would find anywhere else, but through the developed jurisprudence, through the case law, our mandate has been extended. And it has been extended to an extent that we are required to go beyond social justice, which is the bare minimum of an office of an ombudsman. We need to be highly legal as an office. Now, when the office was established, that was not the intention of the establishment of the office. Now, you find that there are investigators who have not practiced in court before, who do not know how to interpret statutes, court judgments, etc. And that is a skill that, with the resources that we are having, we are unable to develop. However, we've had to come up with other means to look at how do we develop that skill, because right now we require a diverse and an agile Office of the Public Protector which fits the environment within which we function. That has been the major challenge for me. For instance, the Office of the Public Protector is not properly resourced in terms of research and learning and development as an office, which is a resource that we need to look at externally right now. We are engaging with the Office of the Department of Justice. We are engaging with other stakeholders, even externally, for us to be able to access resources so that we can capacitate our investigators and those who are involved in the food chain of our cases. So for me, really, that has been the major challenges that I have encountered. But also because knowledge of the office is so not as much capacitated as it should be, it also lessens the foundation of the office, because what is important, especially in an institution like ours, is for it to have a strong foundation so that it becomes a resilient institution. Even whether whomever is the public protector, whatever criticism comes their way, they are able to resist that and they are able to withstand that. But as things stand, it's a huge challenge for us, because issues of learning and development is issues where we are not there where we are supposed to be.
And how would you describe your relationship with Advocate Mkhwebane?
We've got a good collegial relationship.
And that's about it?
Yes.
Thank you.
If you would want me to expand, we've got a relationship where we debate on issues that are happening in the office. We've got a relationship where she actually takes some of the issues that I raised with her. When I arrived, she actually gave me an opportunity to do a situational analysis, which I did, and I made recommendations to her on the systemic issues within our institution and governance issues within our institution that we need to strengthen in order to have a public protector's office that is not only envisaged for today, but envisaged for tomorrow, the wellness of our employees, issues of working around the integrity and the ethics of the office, working around strengthening the policies of the office, our investigation techniques, so that we become an investigating authority that can really be trusted by the people, and our integrity, by the way, relies on that. And those are really recommendations that the public protector welcomed from me, and the implementation thereof progressed, and those are some of the issues that we are, of course,